If the appeal of minimalism is about having less, why is it that at every turn it's trying to sell us more? Be it Apple, Zara, Amazon, or Shein, they all use the same method to market their products, without changing their business models to mirror the marketing. The consensus of good design pertaining to modernity regarding architecture, product design, logo design, and graphic design has tilted towards and was built on principles of minimalism and now worships and reveres it. Light-skinned Fade Rother, back in the mix. Let's strap up, strap in, pause, and dive right into this. Minimalism as a concept is stuck in a time vortex. It's an outdated concept, fully conceptualized in the 1950s, kind of like boomers. Popularized by Dieter Rams, it draws heavily from innovations brewed within the walls of the Bauhaus school. The modern world has no regard for the values surrounding the development of minimalism, however, also kind of like boomers. It's simply a tool to boost sales due to its visual appeal. To make my case for this argument, I'm going to provide some insight for the historic context and then present the evidence later in the video at this time. The psychology and the worldview of those who crafted the rules and concepts behind this movement were informed by the horrors and tragedies of the two world wars preceding its genesis. They were, both physically and conceptually, attempting to rebuild and renew media, public spaces, and tools utilized in everyday life. Philosophically speaking, they tasked themselves with condensing visual media and creating a universal conformity where there once was diaspora and insular trend bubbles, a sort of a return to the monad. The founder of the Bauhaus school, architect Walter Gropius, is in essence the grandfather of minimalism. He also sounds like a PDF file character in a Chappelle Show sketch.
Walter, put your dick away, Walter.
In his 1913 article, The Development of Modern Industrial Architecture, Gropius writes about American industrial buildings in silos, praising them and comparing them to the architecture of ancient Egypt. No, that is not a bit. He was deadly serious. This article was enormously influential. Architects including Le Corbusier and Erich Mendelsohn republished images from his text while also calling for a new movement in architecture that rejected ornament in favor of forms and materials inspired by the shape and function of machines. The goal of Bauhaus was to rebuild Germany after the destruction and trauma wrought by World War I. Rather ironically, their principles and goals landed them in hot water with the eccentric Austrian painter that took power in the early 1930s. The Nazis closed the Bauhaus in 1933, which led to Gropius fleeing to the US, settling there in 1937 and becoming a professor at Harvard, allowing the Bauhaus ideologies to find roots in the United States. There are many notable alumni of the Bauhaus that have influenced modern art and design, but for maximal comedic effect, we will focus on Josef Albers. He enrolled in the Bauhaus and basically made chairs that make IKEA furniture look chic, like if IKEA's HQ was in Zimbabwe during its financial crisis. Interestingly and paradoxically, Albers held the belief that art is a reflection of life and is a great medium for study and exploration. But then, after he fled to the United States, he spent the better part of a decade and a half squandering his artistic prowess and painting the same sequence of squares and circles like the dad from Uzumaki.
I will tell you what the definition of insanity is. Insanity is.
Now, let's snap to the 2-decade period spanning from the 1950s to the 1970s to broadly examine the two foremost emerging art and design movements of the time. Firstly, the Swiss international style. Swiss design's main contributions, or redactions depending on how you look at it, were the rejection of decorative, intricate, and ornate images, favoring and embracing modernity. They placed an emphasis on highlighting clarity and removing direct artistic input from the designer, making them an anonymous vessel for the means of visual communication. It gave us the accidents grotesque, Helvetica, Folio, and Universe typefaces, but rather poetically, these have all been adopted by Fortune 500 companies as part of their brand identities and now serve as the indicator for mass marketability in lieu of personal character. I'd highly recommend reading Josef Müller-Brockmann's Grid Systems for a deeper insight. I happen to think grids are a useful tool in placing design elements and use them often. Traditional art utilizes the rule of thirds and the golden rectangle to place elements in a manner that is pleasing to the eye. But the overuse of grids on the grid has me ready to go full Kaczynski mode at this point. The forerunner of the minimalist movement, Dieter Rams, is most responsible for the popularization of the visual style adopted by Apple, spearheaded by designer Sir Jonathan Ive, whose designs leaned heavily on Rams' innovations and products during his tenure at Apple. I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like whenever someone gets knighted, my spidey senses kind of tingle, and I feel as though they're really into butt stuff. I don't know what it is. That could just be a false alarm, but it is a personally held belief/superstition of mine. Anyways, tangent. Rams' design ethos laid the groundwork for what is recognized as modernist minimalism and consumer-facing design. His motto, less but better, summarizes his philosophy in which minimalism should serve function as well as form. This contributed to his rejection of overdesign, waste, and visual noise, which became the prevailing sentiment in the post-war consumer society. Upon working at Braun, he designed products that were pared down, intuitive, and accessible. He stipulated 10 principles of good design, but we'll be focusing mainly on innovation, honesty, long-lasting, thoroughness, and environmentalism to critique our chosen targets. The above critique and counteract superficial consumeristic appeal and planned obsolescence. This, however, is core to Apple's business model, and without it, there is no purchase pressure, and Apple would have not garnered the majority of its consumer base. We've all heard the horror stories of Apple phasing out older devices by degrading the battery life and removing core features and applications from the device. Apple's latest products are also marketed to their user base as a status symbol to drive consumer engagement and purchase pressure. Regarding their design language, Apple took direct inspiration from Rams' work, as we've covered, and this is best exemplified in the similarities between the iPod and the Braun T3 radio, which, by the way, goes to show no one truly hated when you're unoriginal. If you want to be wildly successful, just pull a Virgil and call it a day. Adopting Rams' design ethos has both pros and cons, however. On the plus side, the language and principles adopted allow for a distinct brand identity to develop. That is, until everyone copies it. It provided Apple with clean interfaces, intuitive design, and minimal visual clutter. The downside is that Apple doesn't adhere to Rams' expectations of a product. They stimulate excessive consumption cycles, they have high rates of e-waste due to non-repairable, non-upgradable parts, and they charge an exorbitant fee for a minimalist product with an exponentially lower production cost. The sort of flat circle of design, no pun intended, leads to a sort of a heat death of creativity, which is what we've witnessed and come to expect of Apple. The same critiques can be levied outside of the tech sphere, which acted as a launchpad for these poor practices and philosophies. It impacts the beauty, interior design, and fashion spheres as well. As usual, TikTok is the nexus of infection for these abominable garbage, hyper-consumeristic trends. These ideals are being presented in a simple, effortless manner, further exaggerated by the short-form content format, but are in fact very costly and often utilize predatory marketing tactics to drive sales, often feeding upon people's insecurities and needs for social acceptance and gratification. Once again, they act in stark contrast of the principles undergirding the idea of minimalism and promote a hyper-consumeristic lifestyle in a never-ending game of keeping up with the Johnsons. The point I'm trying to make is that you shouldn't let influencers or brands or Fortune 500 companies sell endless cheaply made goods to you for the sake of being on trend. It's far more rewarding to find your own taste, educate yourself on the items that you like, and then buy something that doesn't come shipped in like 16 different plastic bags that smell like death. Side note, if you're a citizen of the Republic of Zara, you can't sit with us. Closing thoughts, if the model is less is more, we shouldn't be buying more, wasting more, and feeling less. Before I bid you adieu, I will leave you with this haiku. Bold man breaks the sky, you drown in beige hopelessness. They burst their bladders. Goodbye and good day to you.